Welcome back. With public discontent rising, Egypt has seen a wave of public protests as the street has become the centre stage for anti-government action. In the longest and strongest wave of worker protests in decades, the strikes have spread to Cairo's subway workers, garbage collectors, bakers, food processing and textile workers angry at rising costs and government neglect. 2006 saw over 200 sit-in strikes, work stoppages, hunger strikes and demonstrations. Now, this is expected to be far higher in 2007. But the protesters haven't just been demanding economic changes. Political reform is also a key demand. Police have clashed repeatedly with members of the opposition, including the Muslim Brotherhood and the Kifaya movement in recent months. More remarkably, perhaps, is that the judicial system has not been spared either. Last year, hundreds of judges protesting allegedly electoral fraud clashed with police. We're still joined by our guests in Cairo, Maged Botros, a member of the Policies Committee in the ruling National Democratic Party, the NDP, and a political science professor at Helwan University. Also in Cairo, Hani Shukhrala is an Egyptian journalist who currently works at the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. And in London, Abdul Bari Atwan, editor of the London-based Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper. And let's start off with you. It sounds like a desperate man taking desperate measures.
Well, I believe, Egypt now is facing a very difficult time. The whole regime is disintegrating, the discontent is spreading, nothing is functioning. People feel the heats, the standard, the cost of living is extremely rocketing. A minority of people around the regime are controlling the economic life. They are siphoning the wealth of the country. So they have their own clubs, their own restaurants, their own way of life, and the rest of the people are starving, literally starving. So that's why you can see this is actually reflected everywhere. Egypt, so instead of the regime going and introduce reforms, economic reforms, political reforms, he actually trying to suppress the freedom of expression in Egypt. And that's why we see those 7 journalists, 7 chief editor sentenced to jail. They are not jailed because of defamation. They are jailed because they are exposing the corruption of the regime. That's why actually we are witnessing this kind of phenomena which is spreading everywhere. As you said, the judges, the teachers, the laborers, and now the journalists, all of them actually are showing the dissatisfaction of the regime, the dissatisfaction of the way the country is run, and also dissatisfaction of the succession process which is about to take place, and the regime is finding difficult, so they have to silence everybody in order to make succession of President Mubaraks' son, affordable or actually easily done by the regime.
Yeah, let's stick with his son here in the succession of that. Mr. Botros, if we can go to you now. Is his presidency imminent?
Well, Gamal Mubarak,
is that what this issue is all about? The suppression of the press, which many say would have opened up dialogue over this issue?
Now, let's talk about the succession issue first. Gamal Mubarak and the president, both of them denied this in a definite, absolute way. They said absolutely the Gamal Mubarak is not seeking for presidency and will not seek for it. And the president has said that it's not in my agenda, never. So that's one issue. Well, the crackdown, the alleged crackdown on journalists, the alleged crackdown on judges, both alleged crackdowns are in the imagination of the opposition. First, the journalists...
Okay, how do you explain the crackdown then on the Christian rights activists and the Muslim Brotherhood, for example?
Well, anybody from Christianity or Islam, if they violate the law, now they are subject for a penalty, subject for accusation from the judicial authority, subject for prosecution. I mean, this is anywhere.
Okay, how do you explain the Al Jazeera producer who was arrested for researching a documentary on torture in Egypt's jails? I mean, where does it stop?
Well, I have no adequate information on this particular case, but in general, if you violate the law, now the executive authority does not prosecute you. The executive authority report any violation to the judiciary. The judiciary prosecutes the person. That's the system happens everywhere, not only in Egypt. So you cannot allege that it's a crackdown by the executive authority. It's the crackdown by the regime, by a system, by a government, with the three authorities: judicial, executive, and legislative.
Okay, Mr. Shukhrala, let's talk about this crackdown and how it's been perceived in the US, if we can look at the bigger picture here. In the past, the US would clamp down or make it known that it was unhappy with anything that Egypt did, that it didn't approve of. But in the latest crackdown, the US has been increasingly quiet or subdued. What do you put that down to?
Well, there's been this sense for over a year now, I think, since particularly, since the Hamas win in Gaza. I think that was the decisive turning point. There has been this sense that the administration in Washington has retreated on the whole issue of democratic reform in so-called friendly Arab states, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and so on. I think there's still the rhetoric is still there, but there is a sense that they feel or the message that these regimes, definitely the Egyptian regime has been trying to convey to them for a long time, that it's either us or the Islamists. I think this seems to have found some echo in the administration.
Yes, and we know that the US, excuse me interrupting, was willing to talk to the Muslim Brotherhood. Many say that that is behind the recent clamping down of the Brotherhood.
Right. I don't think they've completely stopped raising the issue. I think it's still there. I think they are. There is the sense within Washington that these political systems have aged and are not very stable. Their future seems, surrounded by a lot of question marks, and I think, as they are probably hedging their bets. They are looking at who they could deal with in the future, and they are opening all sorts of channels. And I think, of course, obviously, this makes the regime particularly nervous.
But one channel they seem to be clamping down, and if I can go back to the clamping down of the media, is the newspapers, are the newspapers and the editors. Mr. Adwan, do you think that journalists will bow to this type of pressure?
Well, I don't believe so. I think journalists were marvelous when they decided to actually stand and show their dissatisfaction with this crackdown. It is, it is really nice to see more than 15 newspapers boycotted the regime, and they refrained from publishing. This is a very, very good sign. But I would like to add to what Mr. Hani said. I don't believe the Americans are caring about democracy and human rights in Egypt or other parts of the Arab world. I believe we are heading toward the peace conference in Washington, and we are also heading toward a war or confrontation between United States and Iran. And I believe that's why the U.S. administration would like to have Egypt on their side, and that's why they actually shut up completely. They are not actually siding with those editor-in-chief who are saying no to this suppression against their profession. So I think this summarizes what's happening, and I believe now Egypt actually in a verge of uprising, political uprising, journalistic uprising, judicial uprising, labor uprising, simply because, as you mentioned in your report, that dissatisfaction is spreading. And I believe the journalists actually, they for the first time, they said a big no to the regime, and this definitely wouldn't stand here. I believe this is the snowball which starts rolling, and I believe it wouldn't end before actually they secure the freedom of expression, and actually they started real reforms in all aspects of Egyptian political system.
Okay, Abdel Bari Atwan, on that note, we're going to leave this discussion. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. That was Maged, Botros from Cairo, also in Cairo, Hani, Shukhrala, and as I said there, Abdel Bari Atwan. And of course, thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.